It's also like a unique set of skills, and I don't think the stereotypes are true in general. But I do think that like the population of people who can write code well and like are also like articulate and interested in speaking to other people. Like I think there's probably a lot of super articulate software engineers who just like don't really want to spend their time like as part of their job, like actually going out and talking to other engineers. But when you do have somebody that like is interested in those things and has that right mix of skills, there's less competition than I think like traditional straight up software engineering roles. But again, on the flip side, there's also there's less demand, I think, for these roles.
Today, I am thrilled to have Logan from OpenAI with us. Logan is OpenAI's first developer advocate and developer relations hire. Logan, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited about this. Hopefully lots of awesome questions and conversations, and looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, I love this. Everybody wants to know what impact do you think ChatGPT and the AI revolution in general will have on software development? So can you tell me how you're thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we're already seeing today is that developers are getting a ton of productivity, like net new productivity boosts out of using ChatGPT as a tool. Previously, as a developer, you would have to sort of go and look through all these resources, read all these different things, search online, get harassed on Stack Overflow, whatever it was, in order to get the answer that you were looking for. And now you have a tool like ChatGPT, which can sort of cut through a lot of those things and just kind of give you the answer that it thinks will help you solve your problem. And I think, again, for me as a developer, it's enabling so much more because, again, if you think about the context of those existing tools, you still had to if I open up some new code base, I still have to have some understanding of like how all the different pieces are working to know what the right question is, the right technical question is to ask. Like I know, like when I look at a code base, it's like, hey, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z. That's the outcome that I'm looking for. How I translate that into like the specific terminologies that are relevant for like the right language and framework and all those things is the challenging part. And ChatGPT can now do sort of that translation for you, if you will. Like I can copy and paste, a file of JavaScript React code and be like, here's the page that I'm looking at right now. I want this new feature added and I want it integrated into all the other things that are going on in this code. And like, I know that's what I want, but like, how to like, I don't know, again, this, like, I'm not a front-end web developer. I don't know the specific React terminology or JavaScript terminology to make this happen. And ChatGPT can now help enable me to do that. So I think developers are going to have like a lot more latitude to like go out from like what they've been traditionally doing. And my hope is like people end up being like much more full stack, generalist developers, because you now have access to all these like really, really powerful tools, and you don't have to like know every single nitty-gritty little detail to make a front-end web app.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And do you feel like developers might be replaced by ChatGPT? Because now, you said, I can just paste in a React file and it will essentially allow me to prompt it with human language and ask it to add any feature that I want. So how do you feel about the debate on whether developers will become obsolete due to ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's my opinion that it's definitely not going to make developers obsolete. I think there are so many problems to solve in the world, and there's also like lots of horrible software that's out there, and there is no shortage I can see in the next the next 50 100 years of problems that we could solve using software. So I really don't think that it is going to dramatically impact anything. Like already what developers do today is like dramatically different than what they were doing 10 or 15 years ago. And like that has nothing to do with AI. That will continue to happen, probably more because of AI. But I still think that it's like you're going to need people who understand the fundamentals. Like at the end of the day, like AI writing all the code is not what is going to lead to like the best outcomes for like products and for companies and stuff like that. You need to have people who understand how these systems work and to like help architect them in a way that is going to make a bunch of sense.
Have you thought about like how humans come into this picture? Like what are some things that you feel AI cannot do that humans can do better when it comes to creating software, because software isn't going anywhere for the next 100 years, as I said. But where do humans have like a unique leverage in your mind?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. Like one of which is, and I was tweeting about this the other day in the context of writing, but like at the end of the day, humans are making things for humans, and like my lived experience as another human is like part of what makes me able to like make the right decisions to like build something that's great for other people. And like you can give an AI a bunch of like data and context and information about the world, but like it still is not going to have perspective on like what it feels like to like not be able to use a system or like not be able to do X, Y, and Z. Like it doesn't have that perspective. And I really do think that that perspective, that like unique perspective that humans have, is always going to be something that's like differentiated from AI systems that can do a bunch of stuff. I also think that like, at least in the present form of AI, and of course this will change over time, but like most systems lack sort of broad perspective, not even about like the lived human experience, but just like about like the higher level goals and like all the things that are happening in the world. Like you can think about like the models of today, the like actual context that they're holding in their head at any given time is like a very limited amount of stuff. Like I have 25 years, 26 years of context being held in my brain at any one given time. And of course, like some of that is, you could say is like the pre-training data from large language models. I'm not actively thinking about it all the time, but like I do have a bunch of context, like when I'm doing my job, of the last 3 months of work that I've done and like what's worked, what hasn't. And like the models don't have that perspective right now. And again, I think that'll slightly change, but like humans being the manager and like the decision maker and like getting paid for their reasoning ability, I think is going to be probably more common.
Right. Yeah. I think this like really resonates with me, because this is essentially what I also did a couple of months ago. Like I had an idea about a problem that I faced when building communities, and like me and Piyush, we were essentially able to teach ourselves how to code using Ruby on Rails with ChatGPT, and we were able to build like a complete SaaS product that is out there in the market right now. And it's crazy that it was able to allow us to do that, because we did not know how to code, and we are not even front end or back end, like no type of developers, and yet we were able to use ChatGPT to learn and do this. And at the same time, I was able to see how like while ChatGPT was good at helping us and enabling us to do it, like it could not have done come in at the managerial position where we came in, essentially. So it was making like some mistakes, and we had to course correct it and also like guide it on how we wanted the software to look like.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I also think that it brings up an interesting point around just like what, again, going back to your original question, like how will humans be differentiated over time? And like, I think another piece of it is just like the ingenuity of like you solving something that you care about. And then the flip side of that, which is like your like uniquely distinguishable insight into that specific, like the community problem that you were trying to solve. Like, again, AI is like a tool to help you solve that. Perfect. Great. Like that's going to be awesome. But like, I continue to think that like the AI is not going to be able to replace like the unique lived experience that you have that led you to the idea of like, hey, I want to solve this specific problem for this group of people. And I think there's like a never ending set of those problems. And therefore there's always going to need to be people who are solving them. And again, the actual mechanism to do that might slightly change over time for developers, but like the actual way in which you go about it is the problem solving piece, I think is always going to be there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's fantastic. Let us now dive a little bit into your work at OpenAI. Can you just quickly take us over some of your responsibilities over there?
Yeah, so I joined back in December of 2022 to be the first developer advocate, help build the developer relations function at OpenAI, mostly originally focused on on our API and helping developers build with completions at the time, and with DALL-E. And now since then we've introduced chat completion, so the API that powers ChatGPT, GPT-4, Whisper, and tons of other super exciting things. And I think the longer I spend doing developer relations stuff at OpenAI, the more I realize like how much work and how much more stuff there really is to do. So I think on there's like a few core pillars of the work that I'm doing today. It's like core product improvements, so like working with our product teams on every launch, and like a bunch of ongoing stuff to make sure that like developers are getting the experience that they want out of the product that they're paying for. So hearing feedback, getting tons and tons of feedback from developers, finding the right teams internally to get that feedback to, working with them on like how to actually action that feedback. So that's a core pillar of what I'm doing. I also spend a bunch of time working on our developer documentation to make it so that people have like a nice, easy process when they're trying to use our products. Documenting all the best practices, things like that. And there's tons of other people who are helping me with this piece as well. And yeah, it's a ton of fun. I like doing documentation stuff because it's, first of all, writing is writing for developers, I think specifically is so enjoyable to me. Like, I think I'm someone who has always like had a hard time like finding the resource that was like super helpful to me, and like making it so that I actually understood. And now getting to try to write things that hopefully solve that problem for someone else, I think it's just so immensely rewarding, and I love that. So that's the second pillar. I do a bunch of like community stuff, like I run our developer forum, hackathon things, events, outreach. So that's another piece of it. And then I also run the ChatGPT plugin store. So I have a team of folks who help do all the manual testing, trust and safety review processes, things like that, which has been more of an emerging piece because we just launched plugins a few months ago and trying to figure out all the product decisions there and things like that. And again, there's an incredible team of folks that I get to work with to make those decisions, which is a ton of fun.
Wow, I feel like you just said that you're doing the job of essentially at least 4 people. Like you're the person responsible for taking in users' inputs and helping the teams work on that. So that's kind of like a user researcher. And then you're obviously maintaining all the documentation, and you're doing this solo. Like is there another developer relations team that you're working with?
There's no other developer relations folks right now at OpenAI. There's tons and tons of, it would not be correct at all to say that I'm the only person doing this work. There's tons of people who I'm collaborating with across. We have a solutions team, we have an incredible support engineering team, the actual like core developer platform team, which is like the engineers who like make our API, are doing like they care about the experience as well. So they're doing a ton of this work. So lots of collaborators across all this space. But I do think that you're right in the sense that there is, from my perspective, I spend like, 5 or 6% of my time on the developer forum. And like, I think that there's so much value that could be unlocked that it's like, there probably could be somebody who's spending their full time 40 hours a week, like supporting that part of our ecosystem. And, OpenAI would benefit a ton from it. We just, haven't made the decision thus far that that's something that we want to invest in. But yeah, part of my role is like making sure that when the time comes, we make the right argument that like that is something that we should make the investment in, because I do think it's like things like that scale super well. You can have like such broad impact by having an amazing forum community for people to come and ask their questions on. So hopefully we do end up getting more support there.
I love this. And like off the top of your head, when you're thinking about you said that there are so many areas where the forum could use some help, and so many things that you could do to make the forum even better. Like, can you give the listeners a couple of examples on what some of those things might look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the biggest thing that I think I intend to do in the short term is like build out like a community experts program or whatever the framing and naming of it is, but essentially reward people who are showing up on our forum, answering questions. I think one of the nice parts is just because of how large our ecosystem is, like a bunch of like great people have just like naturally showed up over time and like started helping answer people's questions. And that's oftentimes like really hard to do when you have a small community, and you have to like really, really work to incentivize it. And we've been lucky that we've kind of stumbled into it, which has been nice. But now I think like doubling down on that and like making sure the people who are doing all that volunteering are like, feeling appreciated, getting access to the right stuff. And yeah, I think there's a bunch of things from a process perspective that we can build in to incentivize more people to help support others in the ecosystem and making sure the incentives are right and all that type of stuff. So I'm optimistic. Hopefully in the weeks to come, we'll have more to share.
Wow, this is really exciting. I just been to the forum, but I have not participated in it. But now, like, I feel like, yeah, I should be doing more and learning more about the tool.
Yeah, there's so much. Like, honestly, I do think from part of my personal journey, which is why I care so much about developer forums, is I spent a long time contributing to GitHub's developer forum and was a GitHub community forum star, or whatever the program was at the time. And they did a really great job of like making it so that the right incentives were in place. Like I ended up at one point, I was a contractor for GitHub, like helping people who were answering, who like had questions using the platform and stuff like that. So was doing that during COVID, and it's super, like at the end of the day for me, it's super rewarding because I love getting to help answer people's questions. And yeah, having like other people doing that as well, so that like it doesn't have to be me personally who answers everyone's question is it's such an awesome thing.
I love it. And how much of your time would you estimate is being spent on writing code?
That's a good question. I don't spend a ton of my time writing code. I think it's probably like 5 or 6% of my time, to be honest with you. I think that's probably on the like low end of most people in developer relations. I think part of this is because the whole intent of our API is to make things simple, so that you like are literally like calling a single function and like integrating this into your product. So we don't have like a super complicated developer product. It's literally just our API right now, and then ChatGPT plugins, which is a separate component. So yeah, don't spend a ton of my time doing coding at the moment, but it's something that I love to do. And it's also something that like some weeks I spend more time doing it just because like that's like when there's launches, I'm like doing much more code writing because it's like getting examples and testing out different stuff for the developer documentation.
Got it. So would you say that you enjoy like the non-writing of code part of being a developer relations person, like more than the writing of code part?
I do, like, one of the most enjoyable things for me about doing developer relations is actually like the technical pieces. Like I do really like, I was a software engineer, I was a machine learning engineer. Like solving technical problems is exciting and gratifying to me. I just think that like it really probably just depends a ton on your role, like how much of your time you like actually spend doing that. Like if I was doing like traditional developer advocacy work of like trying to raise awareness and excitement about a developer product, I would probably spend like 70% of my time writing code and like technical tutorials and documentations. But I think I do like a lot more. I'm at least at the moment, I'm like much heavier on like the communication side. Like I think there's so much, there's so many gaps in communication about our developer ecosystem that's just like the more pressing thing in a lot of cases, rather than me writing code.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how do you use ChatGPT at work?
Our developer documentation is like a custom bespoke platform. So we've written, or I haven't written it. When I joined, we had this platform that existed. So it uses JavaScript and React and a bunch of other stuff. And I'm obviously not a front-end web developer by trade. So I use ChatGPT to like help me when I need to add some new feature or component to our documentation. It does a lot of that work for me, like the feedback functionality that's built into our documentation. If you're signed in, was essentially written by ChatGPT and with my guidance of ChatGPT. Which was super helpful. And again, it's like something that's like a core, super helpful feature that's part of our documentation now. And like, I probably would have spent, 6 hours trying to figure it out myself. And like, it ended up taking me like 35 minutes or something like that, and was able to use ChatGPT to do that, which was wonderful. I also use ChatGPT a lot for writing feedback. I tend to write personally, like I'm talking to someone, like that's just like what flows most naturally for me as a writer. And when you're doing writing that is more intended to be like from a company's point of view and like very general and like not like a little less personal, to be honest, it's sometimes difficult for me to like word things in an elegant way. So I often use ChatGPT to like take a pass at my writing, and like I have a bunch of like specific things that I prompt the model to make changes about, like the tone and the all things like that.
Got it. And what are some of your favorite like plugins from the plugin store?
That's another good question. I'm always blown away, like personally, as somebody who spends a decent amount of time like creating content and things that go out into the world, and anything that can make like short clip videos, I think is so fascinating. So I think there's a bunch of we only allow plugins that use our models for safety reasons. So there's a bunch of plugins that use like DALL-E to generate images and then take text and do speech to text or whatever it is, and like create like a nice cool 30-second video. And like I think that's awesome. I would love to be able to just like put in the topic, whatever it is, the new thing that we're releasing, put it in there, have the 30-second video, and then I can like tweet it out or put it on YouTube or whatever, like not have to do all that work of like editing and making a video myself. I think that's sick. Yeah, there's so many plugins now. There's like almost, I think 700 or something. So I'm sure there's a ton that I've missed that have come online recently. But yeah, those things that like help me in my day-to-day life, and like I don't have to do extra work. Like I really love that.
I love it. I haven't checked out any of the video creation plugins, but I feel like I might use that for some of the work that I'm doing for a client.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear feedback. I think it's also like super early days of this, but I'm also really excited for like platforms and tools and stuff to do, like, you put in an hour-long podcast interview and like it chops it all up into like clips that are like already like preset and everything like that. Like that would be sick. Like I really want tools like that as somebody who creates content. So I'm optimistic. Even like taking tweets or like other things that I've done and like automatically like recompiling them into like blog posts, and like you could imagine like recompiling them into blog posts, and then like the model goes off and like does some research as well and like finds like relevant sources and like brings that stuff back in there. I think the future is going to be wild. So I'm excited.
Love it. Yeah. It would be so cool. Like the things that you can enable using ChatGPT, and how it can essentially give so many of us like just super smart personal assistants.
Yeah, 100%.
So you mentioned a couple of times that you really enjoyed working with developers, writing for developers, and the community building work that goes with it. But can you speak a little about where does that come from? Like, why do you enjoy working on the developer community so much?
I think the core reason is because I am a developer, and I think I have so much empathy for like the experience of showing up somewhere with some product or service and like not having a good sense of like what I do next, like not having the pathway to actually using the thing and like doing something meaningful with it, be productive, and like an easy path to get there. So I'm always thinking about like, how can we reduce those barriers to entry? How do we make it so that more people can access whatever it is that we're building? And yeah, I think it's like specifically writing stuff is just so it's so like personally beneficial to do that. It's almost like I get to write something and like spend time thinking about something, and like it's great for me personally. And then like, yeah, some added benefit is other people are going to be able to use this, but there really is so much value to writing. And I think especially in the future with all the AI stuff that's happening, being able to like writing is thinking, and being able to articulate your thoughts precisely and in a way that other people that resonates with other people, I think is such a valuable skill. And it's not going to go away just because ChatGPT and future systems can generate text that sounds good together. It really is like, again, about like sharing a unique perspective about some specific problem. And like at the end of the day, like the models do not have that unique perspective today. Yeah, and it's so easy to like tell, at least for me today, like whether or not something was written by AI. And again, I'm sure that'll get cloudier over time, but it's mostly because like the people are not writing about their personal experience. They're writing like something very general and like informational, which is fine. And like, sure, AI can probably do a great job at that. But what I want is like I care about the person who is writing it, and I want to hear like from them specifically. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, even I think like AI, like the writing that is generated by AI is more like a lot of those SEO-fied articles that we see on Google, where it just that this was written to please like Google and rank better on the search based on the keywords that you need to use. But like it's always so much better. Like the best writing that I come across, it's always something that has the writer's personal experience or story built into it, and that is something that AI probably cannot do.
Yeah, and usually like an opinion as well. Like I when I'm trying to write something, even if I'm trying to write something for developers, like in my own personal writing, not like things that I'm writing at OpenAI, like I'm always trying to write it from the perspective of like, here's my opinion on what this is. And I think like that opinion and the credibility of the person writing, again, in the context of AI, where like the ability to generate text is democratized, it really matters much more about like, why is this person credible? Like, what is their opinion? And I still think that there's many people who undervalue this aspect of it. Like every developer should be writing blog posts and like tutorials and content like this. It's fascinating to me that developer relations hasn't led to that.
Yeah, I agree. And I love how you added opinion to the picture, like the mix that generates great writing. Because now I feel like now we have a clear idea of what makes a good writing. It's either like deeply personal story or it's deeply thought out opinion. And that is what you need to do in order to differentiate yourself when you're competing with essentially ChatGPT.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, and then speaking more about developer relations not being super popular, or at least as popular as software development, because not a lot of people know about developer relations, or are even trying to get into this role. Can you speak a little about the type of skills or the type of person who would be better suited in developer relations than they are in core software development?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think part of the reason why there's less developer relations folks is because there's probably less of a need for developer relations folks in general versus like software engineering. On the flip side, like I do think like the best developer relations folks, at least, and again, there's of course there's obvious exceptions to this. I'm sure someone could find a bunch of incredible Dev Rel folks who I don't know about, or even folks who I do know about, who aren't software engineers by trade and can still do a really great job of of doing developer relations. But in general, I think having like technical skills and backgrounds like just makes you more effective, and you have a wider problem space that you can solve. So people who are software engineers making the transition to doing developer relations is a very natural progression. At least it was for me. I also think that there's probably a lot of software engineers who are like doing developer relations like work in their current software engineering role. And that makes like the transition even easier. Like if you're the person who's like, you're a software engineer who's also maintaining the company's documentation, and you write blog posts on the side, and like you're excited about that stuff, like very easy transition in my mind to like doing developer relations as a full-time role. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I answered the question, but happy to expand on any of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel there are people who will be better suited to developer relations than they are to software development? Like people who will, probably like if you're essentially, I'm asking from the perspective of somebody who is a software developer right now, but doesn't realize that they can be enjoying their work much more when they do developer relations work.
Yeah, I think this goes back to like how you want to spend your time and what the deliverable is that you want to like produce in the world. I think like the thing that gives me the most joy at the present moment is like not not shipping like a new feature or something like that as a software engineer. It's like I want to create something to enable other developers to do the work that they love to do and are trying to do. And like that's what gives me, at least in my current mental model, like that's what gives me the most joy. And I think that at the end of the day, it like comes down to like what is how do you want to spend your time as a human? Like, do you want to spend your time like 100% doing software engineering work? And like if the answer is yes, it's probably easy to continue to be a software engineer. If the answer is no, and you're like, I'd probably, I like coding, but like there's other things that make me excited. Like I love making videos, or I love going and talking to other developers. Like those are probably like great candidate situations for wanting to make the transition. But I've definitely seen like comments or at least a discussion about like, not, if you don't want to code at all, if you're like, I hate coding, you became a software engineer, realize you really do not want to spend your time coding. It's also not clear to me that that would be like the perfect transition into developer relations. I do think that there's like some subset of software engineers who like don't like software engineering. They don't like programming. They do it because like it's a great career, and like there's lots of like benefit of doing that work. So I do think having like, if I had a group of 100 developer relations folks on my team, like I would probably want to have like that perspective represented. Because again, I do think there's a bunch of people who feel that way. But you still have to, even if it's some smaller subset of time, like I still think you have to program and like actually write code if you're in developer relations. And I also think ideally, like again, in a general framework, like you'll be better at it if you actually really enjoy doing it. So yeah, that's my general thoughts.
Yeah, this is super interesting, because based on just what you said, I feel like I'm realizing that I might be a good fit for developer relations, because when I was building the application that I mentioned earlier, I realized that I enjoyed coding, but I don't enjoy it so much that I want to do it full time, because I also love speaking to others and writing articles. And I feel like this combination of enjoying coding, but also like enjoying writing and speaking to others, like feel like I should maybe strive to be a developer relations person.
Yeah, it's also going back to the comment, the original question. It's also like a unique set of skills, and like I think like seldom do like and I don't think the stereotypes are true in general. But I do think that like the population of people who can write code well and like are also like articulate and interested in speaking to other people. Like I think there's probably a lot of super articulate software engineers who just like don't really want to spend their time like as part of their job, like actually going out and talking to other engineers. But when you do have somebody that like is interested in those things and has that right mix of skills, there's less competition than I think like traditional straight up software engineering roles. But again, on the flip side, there's also there's less demand, I think, for these roles.
Yeah. Yeah, this is super cool to hear. Thank you so much for sharing this and giving me this insight.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, now I want to segue and talk about your story a little bit. So starting with how you got into developer relations. Can you tell us why you switched from being a machine learning engineer to being a developer relations advocate?
Yeah, I was essentially doing so while I was working at Apple, I was also involved in the Julia community. I'd been involved with the Julia community since for like years prior to me joining Apple, because I was I was doing that work while I was working at NASA. And
So you were working at Apple as the machine learning engineer, and what was your involvement with the Julia community?
yeah, so I started off as the community manager, and then I was like the lead developer community advocate. So advocating on behalf of like the ecosystem and the community of people who make it up. And I think the realization that I had was like, there's a bunch of different pieces. I really like the problem space. I like in developer relations, at least in so far my experience, that there's like so many different problem areas to tackle. And like that for my brain is like super exciting. And like, I really, really like that. I think in the context of the work that I was doing at Apple, it was like, we have this one project and we're trying to ship models that do this one specific thing. And like, it was just very like, it was very fixed in this. And I'm sure there's like opportunities to like, and I had a great experience at Apple, and there was lots of opportunities to like do other things as well. But I really liked, in the context of developer relations, like getting to spend time doing these other things. And I've also just been someone who generally over time, like I like working with other people. I like talking to people. I like I've learned to really enjoy writing a bunch. Yeah, and it's super rewarding to me personally. Like it checks all the right boxes. Yeah, so the transition at Apple was, I was really looking to sort of move one level. I was training machine learning models every day, and my hope when I left Apple was that I wanted to be like one level abstracted away from that. So not training models every day, but like still involved in the technical processes and like getting to do more of the developer relations work that I was doing part-time outside of Apple for my full-time job. And yeah, at the time I joined a company called Path AI, which does machine learning and deep learning for digital pathology. I joined to be a senior technology advocate, I think is my title, but I was essentially leading developer advocacy. The challenge was that we did not have a developer facing product. Like the actual product that Path AI sells today is one that's focused on pathologists and clinical practitioners who are like developing drugs. So super interesting problem space. It was just not like the work that I was the most excited about doing, because like at the end of the day, they did not have a developer product to go and talk to developers about. It was like a much different conversation. And like, again, learned a bunch of stuff, super interesting, but ended up leaving there to join OpenAI because I wanted to do something that like was related to actual developers. And yeah, obviously a good choice to make that transition. Again, the full context is like, we can talk more about it later, but like, yeah, interviewed many different places and had so many different conversations. And it was a super helpful process for me just to like think more about what is it that I want to do? Like, what's the thing that gets me excited? And like, I've learned a bunch of stuff about like what I need as somebody who is doing work to like feel satisfied. And like part of the thing that I want to feel is like this momentum and excitement about the work that I'm doing. And like I felt that doing Julia stuff for a long time, and still felt it even when I stopped. I don't do as much Julia stuff these days because I don't have any time. But like I really felt like I was helping build towards this like very clear future. And like, I feel that way about OpenAI today, where there's all this momentum and excitement, and it's very easy for me to feed into that. And I think when you don't have that, at least for me personally, like it's really hard to like go the extra mile to do all the work that needs to happen.
100%, I agree. Can you like, I would like to double click on your interviewing experience when you transition from machine learning engineer to finding looking for jobs as a developer advocate and developer relations professional. You said that while you were at Apple, you were already working with Julia as their community manager. Was this a volunteer role or a part-time, like paid position?
Yeah, it was a part-time paid position. So I started in January of 2020, like being a part-time contractor for the Julia project, and was, getting paid some small amount of money every month. Mostly because the work that I was doing was oftentimes, like, I think over time it transitioned into like more fun stuff, but like originally it was like essentially doing the work that no one else wanted to do on the project. And like, therefore they're like, yeah, we'll pay somebody a small amount of money to do this work.
Got it. And how did you get that role, the part-time position?
Yeah, I had been using Julia for a few years prior to that. Like back in 2017, I started using Julia when I joined a team at NASA. And as part of the work that I was doing at NASA, we were using a bunch of Julia packages, and Julia was transitioning from the 0.7 release to the 1.0 release. So there was a bunch of breaking changes happening. And I just naturally over time, like, had to get involved in the ecosystem and like ask questions and open issues and things like that, because the code that I was trying to do for my internship was broken. So ultimately just ended up running the Julia projects, like did a bunch of stuff. Like I built our presence on Stack Overflow. We didn't have like a concentrated effort on Stack Overflow. So if you go look at Julia Stack Overflow presence, like helped out a bunch there. Also ended up helping, I ran our Google Codin instance, which was for folks who don't know now, it's Google used to run like a Google Summer of Code equivalent for high school students in the fall. And they would essentially give you like a bunch of like rewards and stuff like that for contributing to open source projects. So we ended up mentoring like 212 high school students through that process. And then that ended in like the winter. And I literally just emailed the people who were running the Julia project. I was like, hey, I'd like to do this type of work that I was doing in some more formal capacity. And they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you do that. It was
So
originally
wait,
focused. Yeah, go ahead.
all of this work that you just said, building out the Stack Overflow present and the Google Coding work, that was before you started officially working.
Exactly. I was just a member of the
Okay.
community at that point.
Okay, that is like, I'll just like to that is so different from what people hear. Like all of this work, like it sounds like this was something that you would pay people to do, but you're already like volunteering your time to do all of this.
I think the important caveat is that like this is what happens naturally in the open source ecosystem. If like a bunch of incredible people show up, do this type of work, and then like in a good outcome situation, like end up getting paid in the long run for the work that they're doing. I think all too often people end up doing this work for a long time for free and like don't end up getting paid, which I think is one of the challenges of open source in general. So I was lucky in the sense that like I was able to get some compensation for the lots of time that I spent over the last 3.5 years doing Julia stuff. But yeah, I don't like, it doesn't feel like, at least to me, given the experience that I had, that like what I was doing was like out of the norm. Like it really does feel like, at least in the Julia community, maybe it's different in other places, but like people just show up and like do this type of work that was like beneficial because everyone cared about like the long-term success and like supporting other people and things like that.
That is so cool. And you were speaking about how that transitioned into the part-time position at Julia.
Yeah, so just literally emailed them, was like, hey, I would like to continue doing this work. We met, and they were like, yeah, this sounds great. I was originally actually just focused on like educational content. So we had this Julia Academy platform where we're trying to, and we still have it today, where we're trying to teach people Julia for free. And I took over running that program in addition to the other stuff that I was doing. And then a few months in, they were like, hey, we have this community manager title that like the previous person who we had is no longer here doing that work. Like, do you want to have this title and you could become the community manager? And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds fine, I guess. Never having really like intentionally thought about like community work before. And yeah, just ended up, the scope of what I was working on sort of expanded overnight. And like all of a sudden it was like pretty much everything that could possibly fall under my umbrella fell under my umbrella. And again, I think that's the thing that gets me super excited about this work, is like I really like how broad the scope of the role is, to be able to like really do like things all over the place, like working on the website, working all the like working groups, working on like core documentation stuff, like the educational website, like helping run Google Summer of Code for the last 3 years, like literally all over the place. And like, to me, that's super exciting. Yeah.
This is super exciting to me as well. It's so cool how you essentially got your first break as a developer relations person because of all the volunteer efforts that you made. And it's probably common in the open source industry and the software world, but it's not common outside of the software development world. So
That is true. It's super interesting. I do think that open source like is this unique leverage opportunity where like it doesn't exist in a lot of other places. I also think that like the important consideration to think about as well is like there is a very specific subset of people in the world who are able to do that type of work for free and not be paid to do it. Like it's like a privileged position to be in, to be able to do that. And like, again, and from my perspective, I was going to school, I was also working part-time and doing this work. So like I didn't need the money essentially when I first started doing this work to like pay my bills and like eat food. So that was super nice. And like, again, there's a lot of people in the world who like don't have that same position. And so it's the trade-off of open source that like naturally favors people who are in a better position and like don't need to be paid right away for the work that they're doing.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I would like to learn more about your interview experience when you were trying to transition out of Path AI and looking for your next role. So you mentioned in our call previously that you did face a lot of rejection while you were doing that. Can you speak about the like the interview experience in general and shed some light on how you dealt with the rejections?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, I have never been somebody personally around, especially around job stuff, that like has any strong reaction to like getting rejected for jobs. Like at the end of the day, like I deeply believe in myself, and like if some other company and doesn't think that I'm capable enough of doing whatever the role it is, like truly like I do genuinely think like they're worse off for it in most cases. I'm sure there's a lot of roles that I've applied for that like I wasn't the right fit like strategically for the company or whatever, and like that's totally fair. But like things that I was qualified for and was excited about, like again, I have no ill will towards people who don't make it, but I also think highly of myself in the work that I do. So it's never bothered me. I also think that in the course of my career, if you get rejected enough times, you just like it doesn't really matter that much to you anymore. Like, yeah, I think we talked about this before, but and I've tweeted it before in the past as well, but like to get my full-time role at Apple, or to get my internship at Apple, so I was working at the Apple store part-time for 2.5 years in the beginning of undergrad. And throughout that time, I applied 504 times to different roles at Apple, probably interviewed like 20 plus times for different internships and full-time jobs, ended up getting one job offer the entire time, which was for my internship. And it was, I ended up meeting a bunch of people over the course of the time that I was there who helped me get that interview, did the interview, ended up coming back full-time as a software engineer. So it doesn't really affect me anymore. I do think it's like a bunch of the interview process is like, again, and this is from a position of like having a full-time job at the time and like not being in the stressful position where like, hey, I'm going to run out of money if I don't get this job. So it's a little bit more laxed for me in the sense of when I was interviewing for new jobs. But really, I think Path AI made me realize like what is the type of work that I want to be doing. And it's like I want to be working with developers. I want to be very close to the action. I want to work somewhere where like developer relations is like a core piece of success of the company. And that probably means that I need to work at a developer product company, something where they're making something for developers. So interviewed a bunch of places where like, some of them, the developer relations piece like wasn't core to the success. Some of them, they just ended up making the decision to hire somebody else, even though they said that they liked me. Some of them, interestingly, I had a bunch where like they didn't think that I was technical enough, despite the fact that I had been a software engineer and a machine learning engineer. So lots of like very, very interesting different reasons. In the end, had two incredible offers, one to join OpenAI, one to join another company to do more like open science related work, which is something that I'm involved in. But yeah, I ended up deciding OpenAI made the most sense. Incredible offer, amazing team. This was also before all the ChatGPT stuff, so it was at the time actually a little bit less clear to me that OpenAI was like going to be this incredibly successful thing. Like it really did feel like I was taking somewhat of a risk. Though everyone who I met during the interview process was so incredible that I was like, these people are all so smart. They're here for some reason. It must be for a good reason. So it all ended up working out okay. I'll make one other really quick comment and then go back to you, which is I think the other very unique part about the developer relations interview process is that like the previous work that you've done in developer relations is your public verifiable track record for your next job. And I think that there's very few jobs where that maybe like being a politician is also similar in the sense that like, they can see what legislation you sign, they can see like what you said in your speeches and stuff like that. But I'm like very few, like even if you're a software engineer, like you probably worked on a bunch of stuff that you can't tell people about, or you worked on a bunch of stuff that you can tell people about, but you can't show them your work because it's not public facing. And developer relations is like just not like that. Like if I ever get another job, and I'm hopeful that I'll be at OpenAI for a very long time, but if I ever do, like I have this public track record of like contributions that I've made and things that I've written and stuff that I've done, which from my perspective, like makes it much easier to get another job, which is super cool. So the other interesting piece is like about developer relations jobs is like you also like don't need to work at a company to like do that type of work. Like you can, again, when I was volunteering in the Julia ecosystem, like anyone can write articles about Julia. You don't need to work for them. Anyone can write articles about anything. Anyone can like go and make an online course or like make a video, whatever it is. And like those are the things that companies are going to look at. And if you have that public verifiable track record of making great things, it's like so much easier for companies to like say yes to you during the interview process.
This is such a cool point to point out, and this makes it so much easier for people listening who want to get into developer relations, like myself, to have like a path to get their first developer relations role. Essentially, just do some volunteer work for organizations that need it. Like you need to find an organization that needs it and do it for them.
Yeah, we need a nonprofit that like helps, or some mechanism that helps people do this. 'Cause I think there's a ton of people who are interested in developer relations stuff. It's oftentimes of like, how do I show up in the right community in the right way? And like, I think that's probably where the biggest disconnect is. Like it takes like a bunch of like intellectual work to like figure out the right place. And like, I was lucky that like Julia ended up being like the perfect place for me to do this. But like, I think maybe a lot of people probably don't have like that experience. So it's probably less easy for the average, or for like a random person to just have the same experience.
Right. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And speaking about you being at OpenAI for a very long time, how do you see your career progression? Like, do you look at what your next, I don't know, title will be, or are you envisioning to something in the next, let's say, 3 years or so?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I'll part of it is being strategic about what I put out in the world. I think I prefer to play my cards close to my chest as far as like what specifically I'm after. I think in general, I care about developer relations stuff, and like I want to have other people, like, building a team, having other people that I work with like help me do this work, is 100% in the future. Um, yeah, I think the real biggest challenge for me is going to be that, like, what I see OpenAI as today is like, for me personally, is like, this is the work of my life. Like, this is why this is going to probably be like the most impactful stuff that I ever do. And like, I'm having a hard time realizing or thinking about a future where like I'm doing something else that is like more impactful and more exciting to me. And like, again, maybe that will, I'm sure that will change in some contexts, 10 years from now. I'm sure there'll be some crazy new stuff that like I've never thought about that will probably happen. But yeah, it is interesting to think about like what that future looks like. And I just have a hard time imagining that I'm going to ever find something that I'm as excited about as doing this work, which I think is really great for me, because I am constantly looking for like, yeah, something to keep me interested. And like, I have no problem with that in the context of OpenAI. Like, there's so much work that needs to happen. There's so much excitement and cool stuff. And I don't think that that's going to change. So yeah, I'll be interested to see. I think the only other thing is like, very, very long term, probably looking, yeah, would think about, maybe, starting a company, maybe venture capital stuff. But it's you really need like the right idea. It has to be the right moment, all that type of stuff. And um yeah, I it's not in my short-term plans, but like, obviously I spend a bunch of time like helping people build their companies and think about companies and all that type of stuff. And I've always, like, I'm always thinking about ideas and things that get me excited. So we'll have to see.
I love that. Now, since you mentioned venture capital, I noticed on your LinkedIn that you recently joined A16Z as a venture scout. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so A16Z has Andreessen Horowitz is one of the largest venture capital firms in the world, and they have this really great program for people to be able to come in as a venture scout and essentially work with a partner at A16Z who you get to learn a bunch of stuff from, like, about the venture capital space. So I have an incredible mentor at A16Z who helps me sort of navigate the space. And the basic mechanism is essentially A16Z has a pool of money that's allocated to venture scouts, and the venture scouts essentially get to make investments in early stage companies. And the nice part is, like, you don't have to put your personal capital on the line. Like, there's all the, especially in the US, there's all these requirements um, to be a accredited investor. And like, this also helps you like navigate past that, where you can use A16Z's money, get to work with companies, support them, and not have to like put your personal capital on the line. So really, really incredible program. I think other venture firms have similar programs, but I'm mostly excited because I spend a ton of time talking to early stage companies and people coming up with great ideas. And it's nice to be able to have a mechanism to actually support these folks beyond just like giving them my personal advice. So I'm excited to have that capability. And again, I think A16Z, from everything that I've seen and been a part of, is an incredible organization. And I'm happy to be involved and help them.
Love it. This is so exciting. Congratulations on this new role.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's also like I probably spend 1% of my time doing this. There's so much more other pressing things. It's really just like a fun thing to think about in my free time and on the side. But it's been good.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Okay, now I want to ask you about some resources and advice for developers who might be looking into transitioning into developer relations. So first of all, like, do you have any resources that you will recommend to people who are looking to make this transition?
Yeah, Jono Bacon used to be the director of community at GitHub, and he did a bunch of other community roles. He's got a bunch of incredible resources. He's got all this free stuff on YouTube. He has his book called People Powered. There's tons of other resources that he's put out. He's on Twitter posting a bunch of stuff. So I'd recommend, if you're somebody who like hasn't done, who's a developer who hasn't done like any community work or like community building work before, that is, his resources are like a great way. Like he talks about like swag and like community forums and like, should I use Slack versus Discord, like all types of like generic things like that, which are really, really helpful if you're thinking about building an ecosystem and community. I also have directly sitting in front of me at my desk every day, The Business Value of Developer Relations. It's like one of the most popular developer relations books. There's also a book that Pact Publishing sells called like Developer Advocate, and it's like a bunch of like stories from developer advocates. It's like this thick or something. It's ridiculously thick. So I haven't read all of that, but there's some really great stuff in there. And I'm sure there's like tons and tons of YouTubers who have all different types of content. But yeah, I think Jono is probably one of the few people who I've like repeatedly gone back to learn from. The nice part is also developer relations folks are usually like putting out things all the time on their Twitter. So if you just find a bunch of like great developer relations people on Twitter and LinkedIn and Threads or whatever, I'm sure you'll see advice from them all the time and like what they're working on and what's not working.
Who are, can you name some of these developer relations people that you follow on Twitter?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm always struggling to remember the names of the people who I see all the time on Twitter, because I don't like talk to a lot of them. I think Kunal Kuchwali, I think is how you pronounce his last name. We Make Devs is his like community that he runs. He's got a bunch of incredible content. He now works at Sivo Cloud. Eddie, I don't know how to pronounce Eddie's Jakub, something like that. Eddie's got his whole community of people contributing to open source, and he's essentially doing like this hybrid community developer relations work, which is really exciting. Yeah, there's so many other people. Happy to try to send you some more offline, or just if people look on Twitter who I'm following, it's a bunch of developer relations people. So you can see a bunch of other great folks. But yeah, there's so many great people to learn from. I think some of my one of my mentors, Andrew, runs the developer advocacy / relations function at TBH, which is like Blocks, Square / Blocks, Jack Dorsey's company, like their crypto developer platform. So he's been somebody great to learn from, and we work together at Apple. Yeah, there's so many smart and incredible folks.
Love it. Yeah, what we'll do is after this call, I'll make a list, like a Twitter list of these people, and we'll share it as a show in the show notes.
I love it.
All right, awesome. And like one final question for you for this interview: if you could recommend one action item to the listeners that they can, one action that they can take in the next 24 hours in order to move to a more fulfilling career in developer relations, then what would that be?
Yeah, this, people, I think one of the realizations I've had in the last few years is people do the work that they're naturally inclined to do. If you are really having to force yourself to do something, and it could be like thinking about developer relations, like maybe it's not the right thing for you, and think about like, what are you most excited to do that doesn't take a lot of effort for you to like get yourself into the process of doing. One of the recent things that's happened is my little brother, actually, he's not that little, he's only a couple of years younger than me, but he started doing like a bunch of like writing in the context of developer relations, and he's he has a computer science background and has done all this stuff. So he's exploring this transition himself. And I've really tried in the last like year to like get him to consider doing some like writing and stuff like that. And he just did his first article, and it was immensely successful by like all metrics, like incredibly well received by people. And I think it gave me such satisfaction to know that like to see that outcome for him, and to also see like at the beginning of that process, like his apprehension to doing it, like, you know, him saying like, you know, I'm not somebody who's a writer, I haven't done this before, like I can't do something that, you know, is like this, like it's just not what I'm naturally built for. And then at the end of the process to see like how well it was received, and, you know, the thousands of people who ended up reading it, like I think is so exciting. And like I don't think that there's any like special formula to doing this. You just have to, like, especially if you want to do developer relations, like go out and write something, find something that you're, some tool or project that you're using in your free time today, write an article about it. It can be something very basic, and at the end of the day, like solve your own problem, figure it out, like what is the rough edge that I had using X, Y, and Z tool, go and tell developers how that they can solve that problem for themselves, and you'll be rewarded for it.
This is a very solid advice, Logan. Thank you so much for sharing this and everything else that you shared with us in this interview. It was such a pleasure having you here and learning from you. I love having you as a guest.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. I think, there's a correlation between one's likelihood for success and the thoughtfulness of questions. So I really do appreciate it. I think this is an awesome project that you are both working on. And if I can ever be of any help, let me know. Always happy to help. And hopefully this was valuable for your listeners.